He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Rachel, this is Madison. She'll be taking over your position." Madison, his consultant, his other woman. I built Morgan Link Freight from a 3-truck operation into a statewide logistics force. I sacrificed evenings, birthdays, even our honeymoon. And now my husband, my business partner, was replacing me with the woman he was sleeping with. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just smiled. Because what he didn't know was that I'd already built something else. And this time, he wasn't part of it. When Darren and I got married, everyone joked we were the power couple. We met in college. He studied logistics. I majored in business strategy. While others were figuring themselves out, we were already writing business plans on napkins and dreaming up ways to break into the shipping world. Morgan Link Freight wasn't inherited. It was built, every invoice, every route, every late-night negotiation, by us. We started with a single leased truck in Round Rock, Texas. I remember the night I found our first warehouse lease. We couldn't afford chairs yet, so we celebrated on overturned milk crates, sipping cheap champagne. In those early years, I handled everything from payroll to customer disputes. Darren was the charm, I was the structure. While he pitched contracts and shook hands, I stayed late and figured out how to keep us afloat when the margins thinned. Even after we married, the business was our baby. There was no his or mine. Every victory was ours. By year 5, we had 20 drivers, a full operations team, and a contract with the state of Texas. We made headlines in a regional logistics magazine. Darren framed the article. Rachel Morgan, the brain behind the wheels. He hung it right above his desk. We started drawing up plans for a second location. Maybe Dallas, maybe Tulsa. And I let myself believe for a moment that I could start delegating more, maybe even take a long postponed vacation. But little things started changing. Darren grew distant. He forgot to loop me into leadership meetings. I'd walk into conference calls that had already started. "Sorry, thought you were copied on the invite," he'd say. One day, our head of HR, whom I trusted like a sister, walked into my office and gently asked, "Hey, when did we hire a new consultant named Madison?" I blinked. "Who?" She pointed to her phone. "She's been emailing from Darren's address, apparently reviewing internal leadership performance." My stomach dropped. I marched down to his office, but Darren was already gone for the day. Unusual. He never left before me. That night, he didn't come home until after midnight. Said he was handling a client dinner. He smelled like perfume. I sat at the kitchen island, fingers clenched around a mug of cold tea. He didn't even pretend to ask about my day. That's when I started looking. Not at emails. He'd already locked me out of most systems, but at what I did still control. I reviewed contracts, cross-referenced shifts, tracked invoices. I noticed patterns, private lunches billed under consulting, sudden bonuses for temporary hires. Something was unraveling. And for the first time in years, I realized the legacy I thought we were building together might have always been mine alone. It was a Monday, the kind of Monday where the Texas sky feels heavier than usual and your gut knows something before your mind catches up. I arrived at the office early, earlier than usual. Not because I had a meeting, but because I couldn't sleep. Darren's late nights had become routine, and I was done pretending I believed the excuses. The building was still quiet when I walked in. The receptionist, Lisa, blinked at me nervously. "Good morning, Mrs. Morgan," she said, too politely, the way people talk to someone they've already heard gossip about. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, to my floor, and stopped dead in my tracks. My nameplate was gone. The glass door that used to read Rachel Morgan, Director of Operations, was now blank. I pushed the door open. Inside, sitting in my chair, legs crossed, a coffee mug in hand, was Madison. She smiled like we were old friends. "Oh, you must be Rachel. I've heard so much about you." She stood up, adjusted her blazer like she owned the place. "Darren said you might drop by this morning." I looked at her, glossy brown curls, barely out of grad school, perfume so sweet it made my teeth hurt. Before I could speak, Darren stepped in behind me. "Hey, Rachel, we were just settling in," he said, not a flicker of shame in his eyes. He didn't even pretend this was a misunderstanding. I stared at him, my mouth dry. What is this? She's helping us transition, he said. New energy, a fresh perspective. A fresh perspective, I repeated, as if trying the words on for size, then more quietly. You're replacing me. He didn't say no. He didn't say. Instead, he walked to the corner of the room and gestured to a sad little folding table near the copier. We cleared out a space for you there, just until we sort the structure out. I looked at the spot. No drawers, no computer, no dignity. Madison chimed in, cheerful as ever. It'll be great having your experience on hand while I get up to speed. Then she actually added, I'm really looking forward to learning from you. And something inside me snapped. I walked out. Not fast, not dramatic, just quiet. I passed the framed article in the hallway, the one Darren had hung years ago with my name in bold letters. The brain behind the wheels. It was gone. A new generic print of a highway system had replaced it. When I got home, I opened my laptop. For 3 hours straight, I went through every email, every document I still had access to. I screen captured everything. Then I called our corporate lawyer, Alan Griggs, the same man who had drafted the original partnership agreement. Alan, I said, I need to know what my rights are. Today. Because that was the day everything shifted. The day I stopped believing Darren would ever come clean. The day I realized I wasn't his partner anymore. I was a liability. And if he thought I would just sit back and let him erase me, he hadn't been paying attention to who I really was. The next morning, I returned to the office, not to accept defeat, but to watch what came next. I walked in like I still belonged there, because technically, I did. Morgan Link was built on my sweat. My name was still on the founding documents. I had signed every bank loan, every vendor agreement. Legally, I was still 50% of this company. But emotionally, I was already being edited out. Madison was in my old office again. This time she had her shoes off, her legs tucked up in my chair, scrolling through something on her phone. She barely looked up. Morning, she chirped. Coffee's fresh if you want some. I ordered oat milk. Darren said you're lactose sensitive. She smiled like she was doing me a favor, like this betrayal came with creamer and a thank you note. I stood at the door and didn't move. Madison, I said quietly. She blinked. Yes? I built this place. That desk you're sitting at? I stayed up 36 hours straight once to land the client that paid for it. She nodded too quickly. And that's incredible. You've done so much. Darren talks about you all the time. A bitter laugh caught in my throat. I'm sure he does. She didn't understand. Why would she? To her, I was just a phase Darren outgrew, the business equivalent of the starter wife. But I knew what this was really about. Darren hadn't just fallen in love with a younger woman. He had fallen in love with control, with the idea of rewriting history, turning our us into a me, then making that me look like a hero. I left her there, in my chair, with my files, pretending she belonged. I walked down the hallway toward the conference room, where I had spent countless hours coaching staff, negotiating contracts, running performance reviews. Inside were faces I used to mentor, people I'd fought to hire. Now they avoided my eyes. The meeting was already in progress. Darren was presenting Madison as our new operational strategy liaison. Think of her as a bridge between departments, he explained. I nearly laughed out loud. A bridge? She was a crowbar. As I stood in the doorway, Darren finally acknowledged me. Ah, Rachel. Perfect timing, he said, tone smooth. You'll be working alongside Madison during this transition phase. He said it like he was doing me a favor, like this wasn't humiliation in front of people I'd trained. And Madison? She turned to the room, gave a tiny wave, and said with a smile, I'm so honored to help take Rachel's incredible foundation and build on it. There it was, the smile, the one I'd seen once before, on a woman who knows she's won. But what Madison didn't realize is that a smile can come too soon. And foundations? They have a way of cracking if you don't understand how they were built. That meeting ended with applause, not for me, for her. Darren ushered her out like a prize, and I stayed behind, alone in that sterile boardroom, heart pounding in my ears. But I wasn't broken, because that smile, it lit a fire I didn't even know I still had. It's easy to tell yourself it's just business. That betrayal in the boardroom is somehow cleaner, more rational than the kind that happens in your home. But when those two worlds collide, when your husband is also your boss and your career is the empire you built together, it's not just business, it's everything. It's your sense of purpose, your identity, your home, your marriage, your mornings, your future. That week, I started waking up before sunrise, not because I had things to do, but because I couldn't breathe. I'd sit at the kitchen table in silence, staring at the spot where Darren used to read emails over coffee. The smell of his cologne still clung to the hallway. And in the closet, his suits hung like ghosts, reminders of the man I thought I knew. My friends didn't know what to say. "You should fight this," said Lena, my college roommate. "Take him for everything." But they didn't understand. I didn't want his money. I didn't want his desk. I wanted to feel real again. Because the worst part wasn't Madison. It wasn't even Darren's betrayal. It was the way everyone pretended I wasn't bleeding. Emails still came in, addressed to operations, like I hadn't been erased. Staff meetings went on, filled with PowerPoint slides that recycled strategies I'd created. Once I passed by the break room and overheard two interns whispering. I heard she was stepping back to focus on family or something. The other one shrugged. "That's probably for the best. Madison's vibe is way more modern." Stepping back. I hadn't stepped, I'd been shoved. And yet, I said nothing. I played the part, smiled in hallways, nodded in meetings. Until one night, around 2 a.m., I opened a folder on my desktop labeled Old Pitches. Inside were proposals, strategy drafts, brand development ideas, ones Darren had dismissed as too progressive or too risky. I read through them like they were written by someone else, someone sharper, bolder, someone I missed. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't just losing a job, I was losing the woman who built it. The Rachel who had walked into a bank with no collateral and convinced a manager to approve a $60,000 line of credit. The Rachel who negotiated fuel contracts during a national shortage and kept every truck running. The Rachel who once stood in a conference room and told 3 veteran executives twice her age that they were wrong, and proved it. That Rachel didn't sit at the back table, she didn't take coffee orders from the intern, she didn't wait for permission to lead, so I opened a blank document, no title, no plan, just a blinking cursor, and I started writing, not just about the business, but about me, what I believed, what I knew, what I'd done, and what I was still capable of. Because I wasn't done, not by a long shot. And if Darren wanted a clean exit, he'd have to get through the storm first. You'd think the worst part would be walking in on your husband handing your title to his mistress. Or maybe seeing your nameplate tossed in a storage box like a worn-out file. But it wasn't. It was the silence, the complicity, the quiet way people I trusted looked the other way. What hurt more than Darren's betrayal was realizing how easy it was for everyone else to let me disappear. My assistant Nina, the one I mentored for 3 years, stopped CCing me on memos. Eli, our CFO, who once cried at my father's funeral, wouldn't even meet my eyes in the elevator. And the team I built? They smiled at Madison like she was a new app. Fresh, efficient, trendy. As if I hadn't fought tooth and nail for their pay raises. As if I hadn't defended them when the board wanted to outsource their jobs. I used to believe that hard work meant something, that loyalty bred loyalty. But in those days, in the painful stillness after the fall, I learned the truth. Loyalty only matters until power changes hands. I remember sitting in my car one afternoon, parked behind the office loading dock. The sun was beating down on the windshield, and I watched the trucks I helped finance back in and out. One driver, Luis, gave me a wave. He didn't know. He still thought I ran things. I waved back and felt something sting in my chest. It wasn't rage, it wasn't pride, it was grief. Grief for the version of me that believed this company was family. At night, I'd lie awake next to Darren, our backs to each other. He stopped saying goodnight, stopped asking how my day was, stopped pretending. Sometimes I'd turn to look at him in the dark and wonder, how long had he been planning this? Did he ever think I'd notice? Or did he just assume I'd fold quietly? But the worst question, the one that haunted me, was this. Did he ever actually respect me? Or was I just the scaffolding he used to build his empire? Because here's the thing people don't tell you about betrayal. It doesn't scream, it whispers. In boardrooms, in bedrooms, in shared bank accounts, and half read contracts. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. One afternoon, I pulled out a framed photo from my office box. It was from 5 years earlier, me, Darren, and our staff at a charity drive. I was speaking into a mic. He was standing behind me, smiling. But in that photo, I noticed something I hadn't before. Everyone was looking at me. Not him, me. I had been the voice, the vision. He was just louder about taking credit. And once I saw that clearly, the grief turned into something sharper, not vengeance. And 2 weeks after that, she made me an offer, a partnership, a team, a clean slate, not a pity hire, not a token. She wanted my brain. She wanted Rachel Morgan, not as a ghost of her ex-husband's empire, but as a force on her own, and I said yes. But that wasn't even the win. The real victory came 3 weeks later at the National Logistics Forum in Chicago. Darren was set to speak on a panel. I wasn't supposed to be there. But Sierra insisted I join her team table. And when the panel opened for questions, Kayla, yes, that Kayla, raised her hand. She stood, smiled, and asked, "Mr. Morgan, many in the industry were surprised to read about your wife's central role in founding Morgan Link. In hindsight, do you think the company could have succeeded without her input?" The room went still. Darren cleared his throat. That article was a bit exaggerated, but the silence in that moment said otherwise. People were watching, and more importantly, they were remembering. After the panel, I caught Madison's eye across the lobby. She looked nervous. She didn't wave this time. And Darren? He didn't come over. He didn't say a word. Because he knew. The narrative was no longer his to control. It wasn't revenge I wanted, it was recognition. But sometimes, in order to be seen, you have to return to the scene of the erasure and light it up. It was Sierra's idea. Rivermont Shipping had just acquired a smaller regional firm in Texas, and we were preparing to onboard their logistics staff. The company's board, ironically, included one of Morgan Link's former minority investors, and as fate would have it, they invited Morgan Link to the table for a potential collaboration pitch. Darren would be there, so would Madison. When Sierra asked me if I wanted to lead the meeting, she didn't flinch. "Let them see who's at the head of the table now," she said. I walked into that boardroom in Austin wearing the same heels I wore the day Darren and I signed our first trucking contract. Not for nostalgia, for symbolism. Darren was already seated, Madison beside him. He looked up and froze. I smiled. Nice to see familiar faces. No handshake, no small talk. The power dynamic had shifted before a word was spoken. Sierra opened with a brief intro, then turned the floor over to me. I walked to the head of the table, placed my notes down, and began. I didn't speak with venom. I didn't call out names. I simply presented a clear, detailed roadmap for regional freight integration, a model I had refined for years but never had the full freedom to launch. It was clean, efficient, elegant, and unmistakably mine. Madison fidgeted with her pen. Darren said nothing. When I finished, the board members began firing questions about timelines, about asset sharing, about leadership structure. I answered each one, calmly, confidently, completely. Until one board member, an older gentleman I recognized from years ago, said something that made the room tilt. "Forgive me, Rachel, but why did Morgan Link let you go?" Darren shifted in his chair. Everyone turned to him, even Madison. There was a pause, and then, like a balloon popping in slow motion, Darren said, "We didn't let her go." The words fell flat. Too late, too hollow, because the truth had already found its voice, and it wasn't his. After the meeting, several board members approached me directly, asking for separate consultations, requesting copies of my model. But what struck me most wasn't the interest. It was the respect. Genuine, unforced, and no longer filtered through someone else's title. Darren never looked me in the eye that day. Madison barely said a word. And as I walked out of that building, I felt no bitterness, no revenge fantasy, no dramatic closure. Just this quiet, powerful truth. They had built a story on borrowed brilliance, and now the world knew who held the original blueprint. In the weeks that followed the boardroom pitch, I received offers, not just partnerships or projects, but podcasts, panels, publications. Suddenly, I was being called the voice of integrity in business ownership. Me, the woman who had been erased from her own company. And yet, I didn't feel triumphant in the way people expected. I didn't feel like I'd won. Because the truth is, I wasn't trying to beat Darren. I wasn't trying to destroy Madison. I wasn't even trying to reclaim Morgan Link. I was just trying to reclaim myself. I realized something important during those sleepless nights and boardroom battles. You don't heal from betrayal by watching someone else fall. You heal by choosing not to fall with them. I could have burned it all down. I had the receipts, the connections, the media attention, but I didn't need flames. I needed light. There's a difference. There was a moment, quiet and unremarkable on the surface, that sticks with me even more than the headlines. I was at a small networking dinner in Dallas. One of those intimate events where everyone shares their founder origin story. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it short. I said, I helped build a company that forgot to put my name on the door, so I built something better, with people who remember. The room was still, not impressed, not shocked, just listening. Afterward, a woman in her 50s came up to me. She looked a bit nervous, holding a folded napkin like a shield. She said, My husband and I ran a catering business for 12 years. When we divorced, he took the kitchen, the clients, even the chef I trained. I haven't worked since. Her eyes welled up. I thought I was crazy for thinking it was mine too. I took her hand. You weren't crazy. You were critical. Don't let them rename your work just because they're louder. That was the moment it clicked. This wasn't just my story. This was every woman's story who's ever been sidelined, talked over, or replaced with someone newer, shinier, and less threatening. We are taught to be quiet, to be kept, to be loyal, to be loved, to build, but not lead, to support, but not shine. And the worst part? We often believe it. Until something breaks, or someone lies, or we finally decide that the silence isn't worth the approval. I didn't need to watch Darren lose his company to feel better. I didn't need Madison to apologize. I needed to hear my own voice again, and trust it. Because truth isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just steady. And when spoken clearly, it cuts through every performance, every excuse, every rewrite. So no, I didn't take revenge. I took ownership. Winning isn't always loud. It doesn't always come with a gavel slam or applause. Sometimes it looks like standing in front of a mirror and recognizing the woman you almost forgot you were. That's what it felt like the day Rivermont finalized my new title, Chief Strategy Partner. Not assistant, not co-founder's wife, not former executive. Just me, with the title I had earned, and a seat I didn't have to beg for. I moved into my new office on a Tuesday. Sunlight spilled across the desk. Real sunlight, not the filtered kind through tinted glass like back at Morgan Link. There was no gold nameplate, no lavish welcome banner, just a handwritten note from Sierra waiting in the center of my desk. It read, We don't build empires here. We build equity. Welcome home. I sat down, closed my eyes, breathed, and in that moment, I realized something I wish I had known years ago. Your value doesn't vanish just because someone forgets to honor it. Your work doesn't disappear because someone louder claims the credit. And your worth doesn't dim because someone trades you in for something newer. Darren taught me what power isn't. Madison taught me what ambition without foundation looks like. But I taught myself what it means to walk away without burning down the bridge, and still know you'll never cross it again. I still see them sometimes, at conferences and press releases, occasionally in industry magazines. Their version of the story still floats around. But here's the thing. I don't correct it anymore. I don't need to. Because the people who matter, the ones who call, who email, who ask for advice or insight or guidance, they know, and I know, that's enough. Now I mentor young women entering the field, I speak at women in business panels, I fund scholarships for logistics majors from underrepresented communities. Not to prove a point, to pass the torch. Because for every Rachel who got pushed aside, there's another Rachel waiting to take her rightful place, not quietly, not humbly, but completely. So, if you're watching this and wondering if your moment will come, it will. But it won't be handed to you. It won't come with an apology or an invitation. It will come when you decide to rise anyway, to speak even when your voice shakes, to stay at the table even when they try to pull your chair away. Because this, the calm, the clarity, the knowing, this is what winning looks like. Not revenge, not noise, but freedom. And I wouldn't trade it for anything.